Today in our 2018 Ford Focus, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms, part number BX2663. Keep in mind, for a complete safe flat toe setup, you're going to need a base plate, tow bar wiring, and a braking system. So here's what our base plate is going to look like once we have it installed. Now I do want to mention that the breakaway switch as well as this electrical connector are not included in our kit, but they are going to give us a spot to mount those things. Our base plate is going to serve as the purpose to where we can connect our tow bar up so we can safely flat tow our Focus. It's going to take a lot of that strain and stress off of the front suspension and more evenly distribute that towing force so it doesn't tear anything up. Whenever we're not towing, the arms are going to sit far enough back to where it's really not going to be a distracting thing on the front, but whenever we do go to hook up, we can take our arms and we'll put them in, and that pin right here we're going to want to push until it pushes that ring out, and we can rotate the arm until it locks into position. And this will give us that connection point so we can hook up our tow bar and have a nice solid contact point. Like most base plates, we are going to have a connection point for our safety cables, and it's going to be really convenient. They're going to be right here in the front and be extremely easy to get our hooks on and off. Our base plate is custom designed for our Focus, so it's going to take some of the time out of the installation. Now we are going to have to do some minor drilling, and as you can see, we did have to trim the fascia for the arms as well as the safety hooks and all the other components to come through, but not a whole lot needed to be cut out, and we didn't have to do anything to the painted area. So now that we've seen what our base plate looks like at the end result, let's show you how to get it installed. To begin our installation, we're going to want to open up the hood on our Focus, and we're going to have 2 screws on each headlight that we're going to have to remove. So we can grab a T30 Torx bit, and all the way at the corner towards the windshield we'll have 1. And then if we follow the headlight down, we'll have another one where it meets the center of our grille. We're going to want to do that for both sides. Now on the radiator cover along the top, we're going to have, right next to that headlight, we're going to have another T30 Torx bit screw to pull out, and if we follow it along, we're going to have a few more that will pull out along the edge. So again, we can grab that T30 Torx bit and start removing them. Now when you come to the one that's towards the stop for the hood here, we're only going to have to remove the one towards the back. And there's going to be one in the center, and then 2 more on the same locations on the other side. Now where our hood release is, if we follow the cable behind the fascia here, we're going to see that they're held in by a few plastic clips. We're going to want to unhook the cable from those plastic clips, and we're going to want to work the cable out so that it won't get caught on anything. They are a little bit tight in there, so if you can't get it out by hand, you get a screwdriver or something to pry it out. You just don't want to break these clips. And then we'll have another one up towards the front where it actually attaches to our hood release. So we can just rotate it and slide the cable over and pull that cable out, and we can set it aside. Now inside the front wheel well, at the very bottom, we're going to have another bolt holding it in place, and if we follow it up, kind of in the wheel well a little bit more, there's going to be another Torx bit bolt holding it in. So you're going to want to grab a T30 Torx bit again, and we can pull those fasteners out. We're going to pull both those screws out on the other side as well. Now at the very corner where our fender meets our fascia here, if we come into the wheel well and go straight up, there's going to be a push pin fastener. So you're going to want to grab a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool. And it will be a little bit difficult, but there's a center section that you're going to want to pop out first. That'll unlatch the hook on the push pin. And then once you have that center section popped out, you're going to go to the outer section and pull the rest of the push pin out. And we're going to do that for both sides. Now on the bottom side of our fascia, if we follow along the edge, we're going to have a few push pin fasteners. There's going to be a total of 3 on each side that we're going to have to remove. Now these are going to come out the same way. There's a small notch in it, so we'll come to the center section of that push pin, pop it out, come to the outer section and pull the rest of the push pin out. You want to make sure you pop that center section out first, because you don't want to rip the push pin out having too much tension, because it'll damage the plastic and possibly break the push pin. Now on the front side of our wheel well, right where that area meets the fascia here, we're going to have 2 more bolts holding it in. And again, we're going to be using a T30 Torx bit to pull them out. And we're going to have those 2 bolts on each side, so we'll remove the other ones as well. Now with most of the fasteners removed, we're going to grab our headlight assemblies and very gently pull them out, and we're going to find the connector that's holding it in place. Now there's going to be a little locking tab on the bottom. You're going to want to make sure that you squeeze that tab so that we can disconnect it. And once we have it disconnected, we're going to set our headlight assemblies aside so they won't get damaged. So we're going to have 2 more push pins that we're going to have to remove before we can pull the fascia off. So we'll just come to the back of the radiator cover here. And there's going to be 1 on each corner section, and we'll remove both of them. And underneath where our headlights were, you'll notice that there's a black piece of plastic and a clip that's kind of going around it. Just want to come underneath and lift up so that it's not grabbing anymore. And we'll do that for both sides. With an extra set of hands, we're going to go ahead and start at the corner, and we're just going to slowly pull our fascia away. And once we have this outer section pulled away, we're going to start working our way towards the center, releasing all the clips. Now you may have some electrical connectors. If you do, you want to make sure you disconnect any of those before you pull it too far away. And we'll go ahead and set our fascia aside where it won't get damaged. Over here on the driver's side, we're going to have this bolt that's going to be a brace attached to this box here. So you're going to want to grab an 8mm socket and remove that bolt. And once the bolt is removed, we're going to need to bend this metal down to allow clearance for our base plate. So we can just grab it and bend it downward. On the passenger side, we are going to have to remove our washer tank temporarily. So we're going to begin by unplugging the electrical connectors. There's a small tab, and if we push on it, we should be able to unlock it and then pull it out. And we'll do that for both the connectors. We'll just push the wires out of the way for now. Our washer tank is going to be held on by a 10mm bolt here towards the front by the horn, and then if we come back in the wheel well area, there's going to be another 10mm bolt holding it in. So I'm going to grab a 10mm socket and pull those out. Now in order to get to the one in the back, I am going to be using an extension and a swivel so I have a little better access. With those bolts removed, we're going to go ahead and grab our washer tank and gently push it towards the back of our vehicle so it can slide out of this slot towards the front. And if we pull down, the filler neck is going to be disconnected and that piece should stay up top. So rather than completely disconnecting the hose and having washer fluid go everywhere, we're going to set it over here, but we're going to strap it up to make sure that it doesn't fall down. And then underneath where our washer reservoir was bolted by our horn, we're going to have another 10mm bolt that's holding the horn in place. So I'm going to grab a 10mm socket and pull that bolt out. You can slide the horn out of the bracket, pushing on that tab, releasing the connector, and we'll set the horn aside for now. Now the tab that was mounting our washer reservoir here is going to need to be trimmed off. So I'm going to be using a rotary tool, and I'm just going to cut that tab right off at the bottom so it's nice and flush. Now I marked out where we're going to need to trim the plastic section on each side of our vehicle. Now basically, if we just come right about maybe halfway to 2/3 up of those round holes, we're going to be cutting straight across, and then the bottom section that overlaps, we're also going to be cutting out this center section here. Now you can either use a rotary tool or a pair of tin snips and just kind of pull it away because it is just plastic. And this will give us the room we need in order to get our base plate in place. Now a quick tip, whenever you're cutting this, it is easier to kind of pull out on it, and you get your pair of tin snips or whatever you're using in there a little bit easier. We did have to come back and trim where our horn and washer reservoir mounted at, so we just trimmed a little bit more, coming closer to this bracket. And it's also a good idea whenever you're done cutting everything to come back with some spray paint and spray it on the bare metal areas. That way it'll help prevent rust. Now on the passenger side and the driver's side of the frame, we're going to have this wire loom that's going to be clipped in. So we're going to grab a trim panel tool. I'm just going to pop those wires out and just kind of push them aside for now. And now it's going to leave an exposed hole, and we're going to use that so that we can drill an access hole to get all of our hardware in place. So you're going to want to grab an 1¼ inch hole saw, and we're going to be cutting a hole right into the top of the frame right here. Now you're going to want to use that existing hole as a guide, and again use an 1¼ inch hole saw. Now the frame is very hard material, so you're going to want to go slow and apply a decent amount of pressure so you don't burn up the bit. Now that this side's done, we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the other side of our frame. I'm going to come back with a carbide bit and kind of file down the edges. Now you don't have to do this, but it's just going to prevent us from having extremely sharp edges and potentially cutting our hand. There's going to be one more area that we need to trim before we can get our base plate in place. This lower air dam section is going to have 2 vertical supports. So I'm just going to come back with my tin snips and cutting pretty low. I'm going to cut the lower section, and then we're going to cut pretty close to the top so that support won't be in the way of our base plate. And we'll do that for both of them. So now we'll lift our base plate into position. It is going to be a little bit of a tight fit to get everything in there, but once we have it up, the 3 holes in the side of the frame will line up with the holes that are in our base plate. And we're going to take the 3/8 bolts in our kit, go through our base plate, and loosely just have it hanging there for now. You want to at least get a few of them in place so we don't have to worry about it falling down. With our base plate in place, you're going to want to lift up so that the lower section is contacting the bottom of the frame, and then take a marker, and we're going to mark out the lower holes that are in our base plate. And we'll do that for both sides. With the holes marked on the bottom, we have 2 different options. We can pull our base plate out and drill those holes out, or we can grab a drill that we can fit in between our base plate and the bottom section here and drill it while it's still in place. Now I'm going to start out with a rather small drill bit to start with and just make a pilot hole, and then I'm going to come back and the final size hole needs to be at least a 3/8 of an inch. So then you're going to want to grab another one of your 3/8 bolts and double check that the bolt's going to fit through the base plate as well as the hole that we drilled in the frame. If it does, you take some red Loctite, apply to the threads of our bolts, and then for the bottom ones, we're going to take a lock washer and put it on the bolt as well. Then we're going to feed the bolt up from the bottom, and we're going to be using the handle nuts to secure it down. So you're going to want to put a few bends in it to make sure you can reach the bolts on the inside of the frame, and coming from that hole we drilled, we'll reach in, and this is going to be a lot of just a feel sort of thing, and you're going to try to meet up with the bolt inside the frame so we can get it threaded on that handle nut. Once you have both the bottom bolts in place, come back with the 9/16 socket and we're going to snug them up. And then we'll go ahead and repeat that for the other side, drilling out the lower holes, putting our bolts in, and snugging it up so our base plate is nice and tight on both sides. I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and torque down those lower bolts, and we're going to find that torque value in our instructions. And we're going to repeat that for all the remaining lower bolts on our base plate. So we're going to remove the bolts that were temporarily holding our base plate in place. And again, we're putting a little bit of Loctite on each one of the bolt's threads. And this time, we're still going to use that lock washer, but we're also going to put a 3/8 flat washer in place. And we're going to be going back into the same holes, but we're going to be using the handle nuts in order to secure them down. So again, going through that excess hole in the top, we're going to put a few bends in them until we can get them to at least start threading from the outside. And again, with the 9/16 socket and a torque wrench, I'm going to torque down all my hardware in the side of the frame, and we'll find that in our instructions. Now to get to the very forward bolt, it is going to be a little bit of an angle because of the bumper beam here. So if you get a swivel and an extension, we should have just enough room to get our torque wrench in there and torque that bolt down. And we'll repeat that for the other side as well. And with everything torqued, we're going to need to remove the handle nuts, or at least this section sticking out of the frame. You can either cut these off using a grinder or a cutoff wheel, or if you don't have one, you can take a pair of angle cutters, and if you come down towards the bottom and you just squeeze and bend it back and forth while you're squeezing on the pliers, it should break it right at the bend. You just want to make sure you get as low as you can because we have to have room for our headlights to go back in place. And that tab we bent out of the way, actually just take a pair of pliers now. We're going to bend it back as close to the original position as we can get it. Because we just bent it purely just to get ourselves a little bit of wiggle room so we can get the base plate into position. And we can take that bolt and we'll just get it started by hand for now and then come back and tighten it up. So we can grab our washer tank now, and this section here is going to be going into this little channel, so it's easiest to get it in by kind of turning it sideways, and kind of guiding it in a little bit. You may have to push on the plastic of the fender liner, kind of work it in there until you can get everything to line up properly. It is going to be a little bit of a tight fit trying to get everything back into place, but we want to get that rear bolt lined up. And you want to make sure that your washer tank is in front of your base plate right here. Once we have that rear bolt pretty close to lined up, we can start that 10mm bolt that we removed originally, start it by hand, and then using a swivel and an extension, get it back into position. Then we can reattach the filler neck onto the washer tank itself. You just want to make sure you get that rubber gasket seated all the way because we don't want it to be leaking on us when we go fill it up. Take a couple turns, Make sure it's fully on there and it's in the right position. Then we can plug our connectors back into our washer tank. Make sure you hear that click so it locks into place. Now if you remember, we did cut that notch out where our washer tank and horn was mounted, but you can see there's a small tab with a couple holes on our base plate. So we're going to take the provided 1/4 inch bolt and washer. We're going to pass it through our washer tank. You may have to push up a little bit for the bolt to go through. Then on the back side, we're going to take the nylon lock nut and secure it down. I'm going to leave that hand tight for right now. And our horn is going to mount in the hole next to it. However, you don't want this section of your horn facing up because you don't want the horn to be filled with water or have the connector have any kind of issues with it. So if we come to the back side of our horn, there's going to be a nut. We just take a 10mm socket. We're just going to barely loosen it up, put our bracket to where it lines up, and then we can clock our horn facing away and slightly up so that the connector will be towards our washer tank. And once we have it in the general position, we can take that 10mm nut again and just tighten down that clamp. Now when we mount it, we don't have to worry about water getting inside of there. So then we're going to take another one of our bolts and a flat washer, this time going through our horn and the bracket, and secure it down with another lock nut. It's a little bit of a tight fit to try to reach in there, but if you just kind of push the horn a little bit out of the way, we can get that nut started and make sure that it's going to secure down. We can grab our horn connector and make sure that it's going to reach and we have enough slack for the way we clocked it, and then we can come back and tighten everything up. So I'm going to be using a 7/16 socket and wrench to tighten up those bolts. Just want to hold that nut on the back side and tighten it up till it's nice and snug. Our base plate is going to come with some permanent safety cables as well as some quick links to attach them to our base plate on the very edge here. Now the main thing you want to do is you want to make sure that they're both ends are attached to the base plate and that it's wrapped around the frame. And this is purely going to be in case of any kind of accident or accidental where the base plate were to be removed from the vehicle. So once we have both cables wrapped around the frame and coming down towards the attachment point, I'm going to take my quick link, I'm going to go through one side and then have my safety cable go through the other side. Then I'm going to tighten it up, making sure that it's fully closed. Once we have it hand tight, I'm going to come back with a 5/8 wrench. I'm going to make sure that quick link is fully tight and it's not going to come loose. I'm going to go ahead and zip tie up the excess cable so I don't have to worry about it rubbing or causing any issues on any kind of electrical connectors or any hoses. So with this cable on the driver's side, we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the passenger side. Just want to be mindful of where you're routing it and stay away from anything that's going to rub on or cause any damage to. With our base plate torqued down and the safety cables in place, we can get ready to put all the components back in place and get ready to trim the fascia. However, if you're installing more components, now would be a good time because we're going to be routing our wiring up to the front as well as mounting our breakaway switch, and it's going to be a lot easier with the headlights out and all this room to route all the wires. Now we did have to do a little bit of trimming on our fascia, and the easiest way to do it is if you just hold the fascia as close as possible to the factory location and use a paint marker or some kind of marker to mark out where our arms as well as all of our electrical connectors or anything else that's going to be coming through the fascia needs to be trimmed. So with everything trimmed, we can go ahead and get ready to put our fascia back into position. Just want to line everything up as close as you can. You may have to guide everything through. Make sure the clips by the headlights are pushed in all the way and lock back in, and that'll hold it enough so that we can get the rest of the hardware and the other clips in place. Then we can plug our headlights back in and make sure that they're sitting in the right position. Get them loosely lined up, make sure we can get the hardware back in. And we'll go ahead and put the other side in, get our hardware loosely in place. We don't lose it, then we can come back and tighten it all up. Then we can start putting the rest of the hardware back in. With these push pins, you want to push that outer area in first and then lock it down by pushing in the center section. And replace all the hardware in the wheel well. And don't forget to replace that push pin that's at the very top corner of where our fender meets our fascia. You want to make sure you put all the fasteners back on the bottom of that skid plate, the 2 Torx bits on each side, as well as all the push pin fasteners. Now we can take our hood release cable. You're going to take the little stopper in there and you're going to feed it into the large section, and then just kind of push the cable down so that it'll trap it in there. And then take the plastic piece, line up that little ridge on there, push it down till it locks in, and we follow along, clipping it back into place. Just kind of routing it back. Then we're going to take this end of the cable, and it may help to kind of pull on the cable a little bit, but we're going to feed it into that channel so that the cable can go in there. Then kind of wrap it back around till we can get the plastic piece pushed in as well. And just go back and check and make sure that it's functioning and all the clips are clipped in the proper position. And that'll finish up your look at the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms, part number BX2663 on our 2018 Ford Focus.